Okay, I need to make this video before I went to sleep because I have been thinking about a few comments. As this is especially when I talk about gear such as Behringer as an example, right? For those that are new to the channel, my name is Mark, and of course, the title is Mark's Music Place because I just never changed it. And I built quite a following of people, if I can speak. So I felt compelled. First of all, I want to thank everyone for subscribing and following the channel and the live streams and so forth, and just following the channel. But this was a compelling. This was compelling for me to make this video because I don't think all the problems that we're having in the United States and other countries got their problems. Every country's got their problems. But the United States, we got our problems, and that's going to range everywhere from recruiting in the military to inflation to you name it. I'm saying all this simply because there are some people in this business of music and recording and gear and studios that are just not getting it for most people. Okay, I'm going to use some studio tours, and I'm going to name studios as an example. Let's talk about East West Studio right quick. East West Studio is in California, Los Angeles, I believe in the Hollywood area. 6,000, whatever the name of the street is. I can't remember the exact address, but I know it's a studio. It's been around since the 40s, 50s, and the history. Now, when you walk in that studio, they have multiple control room and live rooms, but they have a very expensive Neve console in one of their control rooms, and a good amount of expensive microphones and outboard gear. And just having 670 Fairchilds, which can range up to $30,000 for that unit, if not more. But then there's a wide range of LA2A compressors, 1176 compressors, distressors, GML EQs, Pultec EQs, maybe Lang EQs, and so forth. Tube Tech, and it just list goes on and on. Or I can go to Blackbird Studio in Nashville, where he has an ungodly amount of outboard gear, including outboard gear you can rent. But John McBride, the owner of Blackbird, if you ever watch his studio tour, has so much expensive gear. I would say that Blackbird studio, the facility, is probably, with everything that he owns, including the building and all the studio and the control rooms, live rooms and so forth, probably sitting at about $50 million. Now, I was making comments about Behringer gear as one of many alternatives to gear you can buy to equip your home studio with, because most people cannot afford the type of outboard gear in those types of studios. 90+% cannot afford that. So, with that being said, I have to bring in a reality, because I think it's only because of the Behringer name and stigma that people start come up with justifications as to why you should buy every piece of expensive outboard gear out there only when Behringer comes into play. And it's almost offensive. And I'm not even the owner of Behringer, and I don't own, I'm not even the owner of the company. But it's kind of like these people. Here's the thing that's frustrating. It's kind of like, let's say you take Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Warren Buffett. We're talking billionaires, right? You would have to be out of touch in reality to think, because you are a billionaire, every single person in the United States is a billionaire. And I'm sure there's going to be people that's going to want to comment that probably say, no, that's not what they mean. When we're talking about resale, you buy a product and resell and what it's worth when you resell it and blah, 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 right? But that actually it is. And I'll tell you why. Okay. You have a person. I don't know what a person's financial situation is. But if you ever watch some videos where someone can buy a $100,000 Audience console or a $50,000 SSL Origin console, whatever the case, right? Or need Black Genesis console or an SSL 948 desk or whatever the case. We're talking consoles that are $100,000 or not more, right? Now, I don't know about these people that seem to think that because you somehow managed to be able to buy yourself an SSL Origin or a Helios console or an Audience console, everybody can do that. And I don't know what world or what rock these people are living under. But I know for a fact, well, I ain't gonna say for a fact. Pretty much for a fact, most people can't afford a $50,000 SSL Origin console. Now, some people may believe, when we're talking recording studios that we were talking the commercial studios that had SSL 4000E or 6000G or whatever, and $500,000 worth of outboard gear, if not more, and multiple control room, multiple live rooms that did have that kind of budget because of the artists and they had artists that were probably had at the time advances or whatever and budgets that could bring that kind of money to recording studios. But millions of people. It's the reason why the home studio plugins, software, and so forth became so popular. Because it's like this. I can't afford an actual $7,000 EQP 1A Pultec EQ. I can't afford a $49 Waves Pultec plugin. This game of the home recording studio for a lot of people is about affordability. It's the reason why people start home recording studios. Most people start a home recording studio in the first place because they can't afford to buy a commercial building. In some instances, some people don't want a commercial building because of all the cost and the headache and the overhead and everything else to run a commercial studio. And we're talking sometimes a commercial studio with just one control room and one live room. That could be super expensive for majority of most people because of the lights, the water, the gas, the utilities, the licensing, and the cost to build it, and the cost to get the gear and the staff, and that's just one. Yet I have a recording studio with multiple control rooms and multiple live rooms. The cost can become astronomical as a point to, in some instances, it isn't worth to do multiple control room, live rooms like that because most people can't afford to pay commercial studio prices with the restrictions they have as far as time and how long you can be in there and how much they're charging an hour and everything else. A lot of people can't afford that. So there's still thousands of people that still go to recording studios, but it's not to the level like it used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago, where that was the only option for the most part. Home recording studios is about affordability. So let me get to the heart of what I'm saying about the Behringer gear and everything else. People were bringing up the argument about, well, if you bought Behringer, you're not going to be able to resell it. You know, and one person made a comment like, people don't buy gear in the mindset of, well, I'll buy this gear, but I'll be able to sell it later on. Most people buy gear because they're looking for something that they can use in their recording studio. They have no intentions of selling it. Now, I get it. Sometimes recording studios, especially recording studios that would deal with renting your recording studio, or you're going to deal with clients and paid clients, and that's going to be your income until you do it for so much as a business model. And then at a point where you're like, well, I'm going to close the business down. I need to be able to sell this gear because I'm going to get out. I'm getting out of this business or whatever. But that's not the intent of most home recording studios. Most home recording studios are buying gear for their home studio because it's personal use that they plan on doing till they die, or they can no longer do it. And then some people say, well, that's the reason why you want to be able to sell your gear. And there was one comment talking about, if I sell one piece of gear, I buy a gear, it's $800. If I sell it, it loses 80% of its value, which means that's all I'm going to make if I resell it. But if I have a piece of gear that's about $6,000 and I sell it and I only lose 30% of its value, how much, in other words, you're going to make more money reselling the $6,000 unit. Here's the key thing. I did the math on it. I said, well, technically, if you had bought a unit brand new for $6,000 and you had to sell it later on in the future, where you're only going to make, you can only get 70% of its value, well, at least I can still get $4,200 for it if I have to sell it later on. The problem with people that are thinking like this are not understanding that most people in the market for gear can't afford a $4,200 used unit. They can't. This is and clone companies know this as part of their research and development. Is why Heritage Audio and Stam Audio and Warm Audio and all these companies, Vintech and all these, make clones of vintage gear and everything else for a fraction of the cost. This is a whole business model of Warm Audio. Warm Audio knows you can't afford a Universal Audio 1176, even if it's used. Average cost for a used one is about $2,000. When he know he can sell a Warm Audio brand new unit for $499. Now, some people say, well, if you use Warm Audio, you may sell it maybe 50% of what you bought for, whatever the case. And it's like, well, if I bought it brand new for $499 and I can only sell it for $250, that's like, it's no different than cars and used cars and how they depreciate. There's only a few cars that go up in value, and that is niche cars, some classic muscle cars, or certain exotic cars, or very expensive cars, or whatever the case. But 80% of most cars aren't worth nowhere near the amount they were when they were brand new. Especially luxury cars. Luxury cars have the worst resale value ever. But whether it's Behringer, Art, Alesis, DBX, and just a whole bunch of other gear. And I'll just go back to the Behringer. Even if the Behringer gear was $800 brand new, and it's only $150 4 years later or whatever, being sold on Reverb or eBay or whatever. Let's say that a Behringer piece of gear works with no problems. It's just because of its name, its resale value, or whatever the case. That's better for people that are on a budget, that are looking for a piece of gear. That's better for them because it makes sense to say, okay, well, I can't afford a $5,000 used unit, but I sure can afford that $150 unit. And there's always going to be a lot of people out there that were like, well, whatever the case, it's not as good, it doesn't sound as good, or it's not as cool, whatever. I don't think most people that spend $150 on a piece of gear have the expectation that it's going to be in the same quality factor as like a Neve unit. Most people that spend $150 on something like that expect it to work. That's all most people have the expectation for it. They expect for it to work. Now, people can come up with 1,000 reasons that, well, it's going to break, or you're going to have issues with it, or whatever, or it had issues, that's why they sold it. They can come up with a million reasons. I will give one prime example of $150 spent that is still working that I bought. That's Behringer, and it still works, and it's working with zero issues. And that is that Behringer MX 8000 analog console I got downstairs in my front room. I've had it for years with zero issues. Everything, every single function on the entire board works. Every single board, every single channel, every single button works. And it still works with zero issues. I only paid $150 on it, or $150. Now, when I bought it, it needed a power supply. That was one of the reasons why it was only $150. Because that board, brand new in the 90s at the time, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was, I want to say $5,000 or $6,000 brand new, whatever. At the time, this is the 90s. But some people say, well, that would be a prime example. See, it was $5,000-$6,000 brand new in the 90s. Now you bought it for $150. I'll give you another example of something that I bought. That's a very expensive unit, but I didn't pay nowhere near that. It's in my rack. You can't see it because not that. That's an Avalon 737. Those run about $3,000 on Sweetwater. I got another one. You can't see it in the rack. The one I got in the rack is another Avalon 737. When I got that unit, I didn't pay $3,000 for it. I paid $450. How was that? How'd you? Yes, exactly my point. Okay. When I got my second Avalon, right here, still $3,000 brand new. I only paid $1,400 for it. And I bought from someone off that was selling on Reverb. Right? Now here's the question. Those Avalons are about $3,000 brand new on average. But I've seen them for half, 50% off what I've seen them for I've seen them for $1,200, $1,400, $1,300, $1,700, $1,900, $2,000, $2,200. It just depends on who's selling it. So, brought me to the make the point. Here's another thing why I think it's such BS when people start throwing these figures of numbers on gear, thinking that because it's a name brand piece of gear, you're going to be able to get 70 or 80% of what you bought it for. Prime example, I was seeing on average quite a few Neve VR and even SSL consoles used. SSL and Neve consoles, we're talking the classic vintage ones from the 80s, 90s, whatever the case. That board, on average, including being sold by Vintage King, I've seen them where they were $30,000, $40,000 when those consoles were $500,000, $750,000, $1 million brand new. Now they're on average. You can find quite a few of them used $36,000, $40,000, $50,000, or whatever, from $1 million. Now, if you ask me, $1 million, 10% of $1 million is $100,000. So, if we say 10% is $100,000, and then you turn around and say that board for $40,000, it's not even, it's less than 5% of what it costs brand new. And we're talking SSL and Neve. So where's the 70% coming from? In other words, if that Neve VR console was $1 million, it should be $700,000. Right? You shouldn't see a Neve VR console for sale for $36,000 on like Reverb or Pro Sound Audio or these different websites that cheap at only 10 or 15 or 20% of what they cost brand new. So the myth about only Behringer is only worth 10% of what it costs, or 20% of what it costs, is BS. It's more about who's selling it, how bad they want to move it, and how much they want to make off of it. Because sometimes some people that sell gear know that they can have a very expensive gear, but it can be listed on Reverb and all these other places and not ever sell for months. And they realize, okay, you can have an $8,000 pull tech on Reverb or whatever and realize no one's going to ever buy that $8,000 pull tech used. Very few studios, the only people that are in the market for gear that are that kind of price is probably still the commercial studios that are still up and running, that can afford to buy gear even if it's used for that amount of money. But majority of the most people that have a home recording studio where they got their setup would be the typical home recording studio, the T or the big old gigantic monitor, maybe some JBL or Yamaha HS8s or whatever studio monitors, KRKs or whatever. They got their Focusrite or M-Audio or whatever interface they got, controller, mouse, software plugins, maybe a few pieces of outboard gear, a couple of Art Pros, maybe Art VLA in there. They might have one or two pieces of expensive gear, maybe a distressor, Euphorica Lab distressor. They average about $1,100. They might have something like that. You know, they can be like me who has a Universal Audio 610 or a couple of Avalons, you know, and so forth. So they do, like me, I do have some pieces of expensive gear. Like I do have an Antelope. That Antelope was $3,200, brand new. I do have an Antelope interface. Some people do have that, or the Apollo, or they have stuff like that. But overall, you know, maybe a few microphones, whatever they spend on their microphones, $300-400. Maybe some warm audio microphones. Maybe they may have some Newman, maybe a TLM 105 or whatever. But for the most part, some people might, out of all that they have, may have only cost them about an average about between $5 to $15 max for everything they got in their home recording studio, because that's just that's their budget maxed out. They're just not going to have a rack full of tons and tons of expensive gear. Most people can't afford that. So they look for deals, like even if it's a used piece of Behringer gear or an Art or an Elisa's or whatever. And I'm the same way with a lot of the gear that I got, that I've acquired. That's the same thing. I don't have racks and racks of all the high-end pieces of gear because I can't afford that. That's why I have the Lin 76s over there, because Universal Audio 1176s are expensive, even used. I'd rather get the Lin 76s. They were brand new, $399 each, and give me the same sound quality. So I'm about done with the video. I was ranting for 30 minutes. So I wish people would stop with coming up with justifying how they think everybody has the same income. If you got expensive stuff, quit thinking that everyone can afford ATC speakers or Focals or whatever. If you got Focals or Genelecs, ATCs, monitors, you got, $20,000 SSL products and $50,000 knee products, and just yet the list goes on and on. If you think everyone, because you can afford it, some people just pockets aren't as deep as that. Some people can only afford what they can afford. And in the end, These are the people that's so caught up on gear and not focus on the music and the engineering and the mixing and everything else that these people can do. It's more about the talent and the creativity than it is the gear. People are so caught up with gear. It's the talent. People don't look at all the greatest artists that's been out there, that's been, have number one hits on the charts, ranging from Michael Jackson to Madonna to Janet Jackson to the Rolling Stones to you just name it. No one looks at all those 1,000 artists and judge them on if they are using Universal Audio 1176s or Pultecs or whatever the case. Studer 800 tape machines and Neve consoles. No one judges those They've always looked at Michael Jackson because of his singing and his dancing talent. Has nothing to do with the studio gear. No one ever looks at Michael Jackson for the studio gear. They look at him for the talent when he was alive. That's the problem with people, and they're so obsessed with the cost of gear. If it's a $3,000 Day King or whatever, then okay, you're good to go. But if you got a $300 used Personas or whatever, yeah, that person could be. So what if they have a $300 Personas or a $150 Behringer Composer? Does the stuff they're doing sound good? And the gear snobs will say, no, it never sound good because they don't have the expensive gear. As if the average listener can hear the difference. Something had to be blatantly bad sounding for the average listener to know. But even the most expensive gear between studios, you can't tell what they're using. Anyhow, I'm done with the video. Thanks for watching, and y'all have a great one.